Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. With Chapter 7 Season 4 being just around the corner, hell, it might even be out by the time this video releases, I decided to remaster my original big hit, ranking every season across Fortnite history from best to worst. Looking at some of the greatest we've ever had, some of the worst we've ever seen, as well as those that are just a little bit mid. Now, before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that these are my own opinions, and if you think something should be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, you're wrong. I'm just kidding. It's completely subjective, and I would love to see your opinions down in the comments below. Also, just quickly, I want to thank you all so much for helping me finally reach 1,000 subscribers. It's truly insane to me that we finally reached this milestone. And the fact that I can sit here and say this to a community amazing as you guys is, well, I can't thank you guys enough. You're all worth a million in my eyes. But hey, without any further ado, let's just dive straight into the video. And just quickly, before we actually start the video, for this ranking, we're going to split the tier list up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different categories, being Mythic, Legendary, Epic, Rare, Uncommon, Common, and Floor Loot. Alright, and starting off this tier list, all the way at the number 41 spot, we have what is pretty well regarded as the worst season ever to be released. Like, people still shudder when you bring this one up. Almost 4 years later, Chapter 4 Season 3. Now, some of you guys who have stuck around from the original video might remember that this season ended up in basically the same placement as it has here. And to that I say, well, bad seasons are gonna stay bad. And if we're talking about truly terrible seasons, then yeah, Wilds is the place to start. What hasn't been said about this season at this point? It had truly awful map changes, a loot pool that was about as interesting as a wet pool noodle, and so little mid-season content that it almost made several large YouTubers quit the game forever. There is genuinely nothing redeemable about this season. And this reputation definitely isn't helped by the fact that it came off the back of 2 incredibly strong seasons with Earthbound and Mega. So to see the game go from those fast-paced, high-octane seasons to whatever this was just turned a lot of people away. If they ever make a season this bad again, I think it's pretty safe to say that it would genuinely kill the game off for good. The player counts are still recovering from this season, and for that reason, it gets to sit all the way at the bottom of the list at the number 41 spot. But following that one up, we have one which you may have expected to be at the very bottom of the list. I know a lot of the community really doesn't like this season, and of course I'm talking about Primal. I mean, this thing, it has to be down here. It is basically a rite of passage at this point, so, you know, I'm not going to talk about it for too long, but if Wilds was bad, then Chapter 2 Season 6 was just painful to play. I mean, the loot pool was intentionally terrible. Half of the map changes weren't even on the building grid, and those that were took years to climb around due to the crazy height differences. The orange grass that covered the map was way too oversaturated, and it just hurt your eyes looking at it. Like I said, even the visuals of this season itself were just painful. And looping back around to what I said at the start of that sentence, I'm sorry, but basing an entire season loot pool around being intentionally awful and forcing you to grind for half of the match just to get what was floor loot the season prior is simply an awful idea. I think that's the worst thing about this video. The concept in of itself had a huge potential. The idea of upgrading weapons you find your way and tuning them to your playstyle is such a cool idea, but unfortunately they just fumbled it entirely. Hopefully they do end up going back to the idea in the future, just maybe not in the way they did it in this season. With the way that they went about with this feature, it just felt horrid to play, and the only reason it managed to make its way above Wilds is because it actually had some content sprinkled throughout the season. Otherwise, yeah, this season was awful. And talking about awful, entering into the common section of our ranking, we have a true blue stinker on our hands here with Chapter 3 Season 4 Paradise. Alright, first off, we gotta address the elephant in the room with this season. The map that came with this update was a genuine contender for having the ugliest map of all time. And to make things even worse, this genuinely felt like the first season to have, like, no major map changes. Oh, well, I guess you had the Herald Sanctum, which was just kind of like an overhauled sanctuary, but literally everything else was making a POI shiny or lifting a few buildings with balloons. I'm sorry, but this season simply felt rushed, and it reflected in the loot pool too. Like, you had some really bad weapons. Like, even though the Evacron weapons had a good concept, in practice they were atrocious. You needed like 12 kills to get a single weapon to max level, and in a game like Fortnite Battle Royale, where, you know, your average game is like 6 to 8 players if you weren't sweating your ass off, it's just never gonna happen. This sort of playstyle definitely suits a mod like Reload much more than Battle Royale. You know, as we've seen with the Morphite weapons, it fits the gameplay loop and style of that mod perfectly. Also, this is such a personal gripe, but this season ruined the lore for like 3 years, which sucks so bad. It's such a huge integral part of what the game actually is. And even now, to this day, we're still recovering from what this season did in what, like a 30-second long cutscene. And while I'm talking about the lore, holy crap, this season also had literally one of the worst live events of all time. Definitely the worst end of chapter event, being, of course, Fracture. It was genuinely so boring. It felt like they made the fun part into a cutscene, and they made the part you actually play into the boring bit that feels like it should have only lasted 2.5 minutes tops. I'm sorry, but the only redeemable part of this season was the Battle Pass trailer, bro. It was that dire. Genuinely, this season was so bad. I have no idea what they were thinking. I mean, it wasn't like Primal or Wild bad. You know, it was actually playable, but I'm sorry, it was just so boring. And that's why it's at the number 39 spot on this list. But carrying on from that point, sitting all the way at the number 38 spot, we have a super controversial one, Chapter 5, Season 4, Absolute Doom. Listen, either you love this one or you hated it, and I am definitely on the latter side of that argument. I mean, say what you want to say about collab seasons, I gotta admit that this one pulled the theming off pretty well, but you know what, I'm just gonna get the biggest issue with this season out of the way first, and I do promise we are gonna get out of this negativity bubble soon, but is that the Hoverjets ruined any chance I could have had enjoying this season at all. Literally every single combat encounter was just solved by having this item in your hotbar. Shot by an assault rifle? Use the jets. Shotgun? Use the jets. Captain America's shield? Boost around them and then just shred them. Literally every single fight was the same, and it made Zero Build actually unplayable. And it really is a shame, because once they got vaulted during Fortnite Maze, I enjoyed that season like way more. But at the same time, that was like only 3 weeks tops, and for the larger half of the season, it just felt entirely unfair. It felt super broken, essentially all the way through. Adding an item as good as the Hoverjets into a season with bullet drop was a recipe for disaster, and it's no wonder this season flopped as hard as it did. But following that one up, coming up next at the number 37 spot is one that might shock you, and it's gonna be Chapter 1 Season 1 and Chapter 1 Season 0, or as some might call it, pre-season. I'm just lumping them together because of how similar they were. I mean, being the first season of the game and all, it brought basically everything Fortnite is known for today. The gunplay, the cartoony art style, the cosmetics, it's been talked about to death. But without this season, we wouldn't even have a Fortnite, so we gotta give it points for that. And while I'm talking about giving this season some credit, coming out with a Chapter 1 map on day 1 was genuinely insane. It's crazy how they pulled that one off on their first try. And at the same time, the loophole that came with Season 1 was also pretty solid in of itself. I mean, apart from some minor tweaks and balance changes, it would stay pretty much the same throughout all of Chapter 1 and even into early Chapter 2, which I think just goes to show how good it actually was. Now, mind you, it wasn't all good. You know, of course, seeing as the game had just come out, a lot of features were still being baked and tweaked, you know, seen clearly with the empty maps and the basic loopholes of this era. And in my opinion, the game wouldn't truly settle into what it would eventually become until around maybe mid-Season 4. But again, as I've said several times on this channel, for what it was, what it did, and you know, when it did it, this season was genuinely groundbreaking stuff, and it deserves to be sat above the previous 4 seasons. But at the same time, it was the first season ever released, so it can't go too high. I'm not crazy, but talking about a season that was crazy, and not at all in a good way, we're gonna move on to Chapter 5 Season 2, Myths and Mortals. Now, this season did have some huge positives. Don't get me wrong, the Wings of Icarus were one of my favorite movement items of all time. Literally, to this day, I still sometimes load up like a creative map just to mess around with these things. They were super fun. And the points of interest added in this season were super cool too. Mount Olympus and Grim Gate were genuinely some of my favorite locations in modern Fortnite, and it improved the Chapter 5 Season 1 map immeasurably. But if all I have is Glaze for day 1 of the season, then why is it so far down the list? Well, that's because of what happened just a couple of weeks into said season. I'm sorry, but removing the entire theming for literally half of the season just to add 3 mediocre Avatar-themed mythics was for sure a stupid decision. And especially seeing as the mythic that they chose to keep in the season after they vaulted all of these items was broken as hell and essentially a hit scan weapon in a season where the bullet drop was arguably at its worst point, just made for a gameplay meta that stunk to take part in. Yeah, it isn't the best season of all time, that much can be said, but it also isn't the worst. So I do think where it's been placed is right for a season of its caliber. There's just been so much better. But carrying on from that point, all the way at the number 35 spot in this list, we have our first mini-season being Galactic Battle. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this one has grown on me a lot since the last time I talked about it. What it did was super cool, with the entire loot pool being shaken up with Star Wars blasters and various different items, but at the end of the day, I think all of the problems that this season had can be summed up in one short phrase. It simply lasted a little bit too long. I'm pretty sure what I said in my original video still sums it up perfectly. Despite lasting for only around 4 weeks, it was still far too long for what it had to offer. Also, the locations in the season were so bad. How did they even think half of these were a good idea? Sorry. Getting back on track. If I gotta give this season one positive thing though, the Death Star Sabotage event was a certified banger. Even if it did make like 0 sense when you actually stop to look at what happened in it, it felt great to have a proper full-scale live event for the first time since Fracture. Some might even argue Collision if you don't want to count that one. And without this event happening, there's quite a big chance that we could have never gotten events like Shattered or 0 Hour. It's okay. It isn't bad by any means, but like I said for the last one, it just isn't good either. It's just fine. But here's one that I didn't enjoy playing, Chapter 5 Season 1 Underground. Honestly, I have warmed up to this season a little bit. It was definitely one of the most equally balanced seasons for both builds and Zero build. The map was okay, I suppose. And that's all the good things I have to say about this season. Okay, yeah, I'm taking back what I said about the map. It was so bland and it was so lifeless, with half the points of interest basically feeling identical. Nothing about it was standout, and literally any one of these locations could have been swapped around with no real consequence. I mean, to this day, I still get confused between my memories of dropping up Bitsy Riviera and Snooty Steps. It was so ass. I genuinely don't understand how so many people like this one. I mean, the only actual gem on this map was Hazy Hillside, and even that disappeared after 1 season. And even looking outside of the map, the content that you got in this season was just destitute. There was absolutely nothing for like weeks at a time. And even if you wanted to focus on the gameplay that you had in the game, it was just full of awful, overpowered weapons and broken metas. Like, carrying the Frenzy Auto Shotgun and the Prime Reaper Sniper Rifle at the same time was just way too much. It made for a miserable experience, and every single fight was like over in 2.5 seconds. Seriously, I don't think there was a single weapon in that loot pool that didn't have a DPS under 180. I'm sorry, but it was a terrible way to start off a chapter. It's like they looked at what made other Season 1 so great, tried to copy it, and instead of capturing the simple feel that a lot of people tend to love, they accidentally made the game feel hollow and empty. It just felt unfinished and unpolished. And I'm sorry guys, maybe you do like the more realistic tones that this season took on, and I can totally see why somebody may have enjoyed it, but unfortunately, it just wasn't for me. But following that one up is one that I actually did like, being Chapter 1 Season 2. Now, like Season 1, you may be surprised to see this so far down the list, what with it being one of the most praised seasons in the game's history. And whilst that is true, you know, it's pretty much the Fortnite season when you look at what it added to the game. I'm sorry, but I simply can't put it above some of the newer seasons on this tier list. It's good, but don't get me wrong, it's not that good. What this season did for the locations the game would add in the future was generational. I mean, you had all-in-one update, Tilted Towers, Shifty Shafts, Junk Junction, Haunted Hills, not to mention a ton of smaller non-point of interest locations like the Motel and Soccer Stadium. Seriously, the game would have never reached the popularity it did without these locations. I mean, it also brought some super iconic items to the loot pool. Things like the grenade launcher, the mini shield portion, and the impulse grenades were seen for the first time ever, and would later go on to inspire even crazier items like shockwaves. It cannot be stated enough just how much this season of Fortnite shaped the game's trajectory and put it on course to become the Goliath it is today. But at the end of the day, it still did have those rough edges that you can see quite clearly in some of the early seasons of Fortnite, so I do think it deserves to be sat at the number 33 spot on this list. Moving on though, we are just going to quickly touch on the season that directly followed the one I just talked about, obviously being Season 3. Now, this one is kind of infamous for only having 1 point of interest added, with Lucky Landing being added just in time for the Lunar New Year holidays. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't lie, as much as I think this season is kind of good, it did definitely miss on that side of things. I'm sorry. there just isn't really anything to defend there. Like, they were still figuring out what a season even was at that point in the game's lifespan, so I can kind of understand why they did what they did. It was just a little bit of fun to break up the gap between Season 2 and Season 4. I will say, even if they did miss a little bit on the map changes, somewhere they didn't miss was the loot pool. Holy crap, this season had some insane items. Like, I don't know what the dev who made the guided RPG was on, but I want some of that. It is such a fun item, and it could only have come out in that era of the game. I mean, you also had a ton of, like, super iconic items. You had the Chapter 1 heavy shotgun, you had clingers, as well as a ton of smaller editions, like the hunting rifle and the Portafort and the LMG. And to top everything else off, this season also kickstarted the Fortnite story with the Comet in the Sky, which was, by the way, super cool. It blew everybody's mind at the time. And it also started the whole running gag with people saying, like, rest in peace Tilted Towers every single season, which I loved the bits and pieces, and eventually would end up having actual payoff in the Unvaulted event just over a year later. With how forgettable this season tends to be half of the time, it can be surprising at just how much it added to the game. But at a runtime of only 67 days, I'm not joking guys, look it up, and with how little it changed the game gameplay-wise, this literally could have been an update to Season 2 and nobody would have noticed. But if that season didn't affect the game too much in the long run, here's one that did the exact opposite of that, with a season I would argue changed the game forever, Chapter 2 Season 1. Oh boy, we got a lot to talk about for the season, so strap in. I mean, starting off, the loot pool was incredible. It was basically a soft reset after the chaos of Season X, and it felt so refreshing at the time. It stripped everything back to its basics, you know, just like a standard assault rifle, a pump shotgun, a basic SMG. This season was definitely the last time the game felt as simple as it used to, and I will admit that the game sort of jumped the shark after this, like, especially after the introduction of Mythics, the game kind of reached a turning point, which it just couldn't come back from. But no, I would say that this season is definitely the last bastion of that kind of feel for the game. And I do think that a big reason why this season felt as special as it did was the map that came with it. I mean, it was amazing, you know, I mean, being A, the first new map ever, and B, being, you know, an early Chapter 2 map, it just felt an absolute joy to explore. Every single POI was in its prime, and they all felt evenly weighted to land at. There was literally zero disadvantage to dropping at Holly Hedges versus maybe Lazy Lake or Sweaty Sands, and I think that's how a Fortnite map always should be. Then again, the season itself, it also had some pretty good events going on. It had a really solid Fortnite maze, you know, not the best, but it was still a pretty good one, and you could definitely tell they were putting effort into it. And on top of that, you had what I reckon is the best Winterfest of all time. You know, it was super cozy, it had the last full snow map, it introduced the Winterfest cabin, and as a result of that, the presents as well. Plus, it also had the snowstorms on the map, which have literally never come back again. I do think that's definitely a shame. It added so much to the atmosphere. But you guys may be thinking, okay, this is all well and good, you seem to be glazing this thing to death, but how the hell did it have a Fortnite maze and a Winterfest in one single season? And to explain that question, we come to the biggest flaw that this season had, being that it lasted almost 130 days. This sucked, and it gave us some of the longest content droughts the game has ever seen. I'm pretty sure that we went like 60 whole days with the only update to the game being an upgrade bench. Man, it was so devastating seeing that happen in real time. I have always held this opinion that this season would have been an all-timer if it didn't last as long as it did. Seriously, dropping out of the bus straight from a cutscene for your first match ever is literally a top 3 Fortnite moment of all time. I would literally put that right next to Ball for the End events. It is one of the coolest things Fortnite has ever done. It is such a shame that Epic got screwed so hard with what was going on in the world at the time, because seriously, if this season had lasted maybe 90 days, ending pretty soon after Winterfest, maybe in like late December, it would have been remembered really fondly and might have even broken into the top 10 on this list. But as it stands, unfortunately it couldn't, and that's why it sat at the number 31 spot on this ranking. This one deserved so much better. Moving on to the next stop on our rankings though, we have one which is currently playable as of recording this video, so I have a very fresh insight into this season, being Chapter 1 Season 9, Neo. Alright, now, looking past the admittedly really well put together theming for this season, you know, if there's one thing you can't slander about it, it's the fact that it had a really solid and present aesthetic. This was basically the first true mediocre season of Fortnite. It only really served as filler between Season 8 and Season X, plus it did also have a really bad loot pool, all things considered, you know, with a burst SMG, the nerf drum gun, and the really busted combat shotgun. So this season didn't really have much going for it. I will give it this though, it was the first season person in Fortnite history to have the balls to vault the pump shotgun. I gotta give it credit there. That was huge at the time. You would have believed Tim Sweeney had, like, blown up an orphanage or something like that with how the community reacted to it. I mean, on top of that as well, it also had the best summer event of all time. Like, guys, if you didn't play this, you wouldn't know how crazy it was at the time. You know, you had a brand new, completely unique LTM coming out every single day and a brand new weapon being unvaulted at the same time. Plus, the live event that this season brought to the game is still talked about to this day. Final Showdown is a top 5 event ever, especially for the time. Like, it feels so weird thinking about it because this was like less than a year after the Butterfly event. But at the end of the day, I am kind of nitpicking like really small parts of this season to compliment. It is definitely just a little bit mediocre, and it ends up getting overshadowed by what came before and after it all the time. And with a mid loot pool plus some like really bad map changes, apart from like Mega Mole. God, I love you, Mega Mole. Mega Mole, you are the best point of interest in the game. I love you, Mega Mole. Please, I love you, Mega Mole. Marry me. It sadly ended up feeling a little bit forgettable, and unfortunately, that's why it's sat at the number 30 spot on this list. However, on the other side of things, we're going to move on and talk about a season that isn't just memorable, it's basically infamous at this point. And I know I've said this a few times already, but for this one I truly mean it, with potentially one of the most controversial seasons across the entire lifespan of the game, a season which irreparably changed how Fortnite Discord would play out for the rest of the game's lifespan, Chapter 5 Season 3 Wrecked. Oh, okay, I'll get the good stuff out of the way first. And starting off, I'm not gonna lie, guys, I actually like this season way more than any other during Chapter 5. You know, it just had that Fortnite-y feeling. It had a solid and cartoony vibe, and it pulled it off expertly. I mean, the theme in of itself was chaos, and you certainly got that with this season. Like everything from the map changes, to the feel of the season, to the collabs. I mean, the collabs were perfect. You just got such a specific vibe out of the content that this season offered to you. And it gave it such a distinct feel, especially when you compare it to the more, like, grounded and gritty seasons that you saw throughout the rest of Chapter 5. But, of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, guys. We gotta talk about the cars and all the other broken items that came this season. It was just so unplayable at times, especially in the first like 2 weeks of the season before everything got nerfed into the ground. Seriously, you were getting people who would just ride around in these boss cars because remember at the beginning of the season these things were basically immortal. You couldn't actually blow them up. You just have those people going around and just absolutely shredding through anybody who made the mistake of not taking a car in those first few days. And to make matters even worse, you also had items like Nitro and the Nitro Gauntlets. The hitboxes for these attacks were huge, and it just disorientated you immediately. You couldn't stay still in the season, and you couldn't tell what was going on at any single moment. I mean, for what it was trying to do, it was absolutely phenomenal. I say this, and it's going to be another controversial take, but if they took this sort of gameplay and turned it into its own mode, it would be really, really fun. I think a mode with this vibe would do amazingly, but as a Battle Royale season, it just ended up being way too over the top. Listen, even though it definitely was my favorite in that bundle of seasons, it did end up overplaying its hand. You know, it went way too strong with what it was trying to do, and that's why it's at the number 29 spot on this list. Don't worry, guys, I think it's bad. I just don't think it's as bad as everybody else says. But, in my opinion, it's not the only season with these issues, because coming up next is another with a very similar reputation, what with it having its own variation of broken vehicle that can clap you in 2 hits, and a really incredible theme that hasn't been matched by anything else since, Season X. Now, dude, holy crap, Season X. Season X is such a hard topic to discuss. I am totally going to make a separate video just discussing the season. I would love to just take it apart. There is just so much to say about this season, for better and for worse. Oh my god, did I love this season when it came out. I was playing this season so much. This is potentially my most played Chapter 1 season. You know, obviously seeing as I only really ever played 3. But as somebody that was maining Team Rumble at this point in time, this was literally a dream come true. It was perfect for that mode. And for that reason, I definitely have a huge soft spot surrounding it. So I just want to kind of let you guys know that going into this point, I actually did enjoy this season quite a lot. And whilst this might be a hot take, which by the way, if you also want to see a video based entirely around my hot takes, then make sure to leave a comment down below. I truly believe that this season would have been a top 10, hell, maybe even a top 5 of all time, if it didn't have its one major issue, the mechs. Oh man, the mechs sucked. Like, when people talk about something like the Typhoon Blade or a medallion ruin a season, I know they haven't seen what an actual meta-destroying item looked like. Seriously, the only thing that even came close to this item was the day 1 boss car from Rect, and even then, that was only about half as strong as these things were at their prime. It is such a shame. The amount of content we were getting was insane, and I genuinely believe that we are never going to see a season this crazy ever again. Like, a whole ass brand new point of interest, sometimes even multiple every single week. Brand new items dropping constantly. I'm in awe at the sheer amount of just stuff we got in this season. The day 1 version of the Season X map is genuinely unrecognizable to its final version. It's such a shame that this season is weighted down by such a heavy burden, because literally everything else that it added was a 10 out of 10 change, and I still to this day can't believe we ever got to experience it in real time. Also, this season gets W points for adding the Scientist, aka the best skin in the game. No, I won't hear anybody out, it's the best skin in the game! Alright. And heading into the rare tier section of our video, we're gonna start off with what is the quintessential mid-season. It's not bad, but it's not good either, being Chapter 2 Season 8 Cubed. Honestly, the best way to describe this season, and if I was to sum it up into a phrase, was the overall, with how high the expectations were for this season going into it, like all of the build-up that came with this season, and all the crazy teasers that we got before the event, it just kind of let us all down. I mean, especially with the Sky 5 event that happened literally the day before the season. You know, it had a crazy cliffhanger. Like, you just turned around, you would see the island get, like, pummeled with about 1 billion different cubes. It looked like we were gonna have a full-on post-apocalypse. And once downtime finished and people logged on, they were just kind of greeted with literally no changes from the last season. Like, nothing really happened, and it definitely soured some people's opinions of this season on day 1. I mean, the loot pool stayed effectively the same as it had through Chapter 1 and 2, with some notable exceptions in the cases of the sideways weapons, but even then, those things just weren't that great. And with it being capped off by a Fortnite maze that sort of felt like it had happened with or without the event happening at the same time as the season, it just sort of led to a slow fizzle out to a season that had huge initial expectations. Well, what more can I even add? This season was such a nothing burger with only a few notable moments. I mean, don't get me wrong, the end event was truly phenomenal and is essentially the one good thing this season brought to the table. The whole bounty gold board, whatever it was, system was really fun to take part in, but outside of those two things, Cubed was just kind of forgettable. This is the mid-season in the actual sense of the word. Literally nothing happened. And talking about mid, coming up next at the number 26 spot is Super. Alright. I'm sorry, guys. Don't murder me for this one. Listen, I know that this season seems to have, like, a weirdly strong fan base, and I don't understand how. Like, if you go onto Twitter, you will see demons out here defending the good name of Super. It's actually kind of insane for a season which I didn't even really think about while I was playing it. I mean, I guess the tier system that this thing brought was cool, and did actually encourage people to start fighting, which was definitely a big issue with late Chapter 6, I can admit. I gotta say, the Beast pom-poms were a genuine menace. It actually made me quit Battle Royale fully. For like the rest of the season, I didn't play until the event. I just stayed in OG Season 4.
I like it in here.
But again, I'm sorry guys, that's all I've got. Nothing else really happened in this season. Is this the first case of a season being carried entirely by its battle pass? Because as far as I know, that's all that anyone talks about when it comes to this one. Even though I will admit the rank system was kinda cool, it was just a quarter polish to a chair that just didn't exist. It felt kinda useless in the season it was in, and I think it deserved a season that was way higher in octane and loot pool power. It felt like it had potential, but it simply forgot to use any of it. And while we're on the topic of waste of potential, sitting all the way at the number 25 spot on this list, we have Chapter 2 Season 5 0 Point. Yeah, I mean, this thing, it didn't really add much. Like, the 0 Point desert was cool, I guess. I did kind of like some parts of it. The changing Coliseum idea was pretty cool to see, you know, going match to match with different interiors. Like, you had one which was kind of like a stadium, you had one which had like 2 boats. Salty Towers was actually a really good location. I did mess with that really hard. Being a mashup of 2 of the best locations in Fortnite history is always going to be a winner, but outside of that, every other location added in this season was definitely more mid than anything else. The loot pool was pretty mediocre too. You had items like the lever action shotgun and rifle, which ranged from like okay at best to downright unusable depending on rarity. And this season, I gotta say, it definitely wasn't helped by the main gimmick of it being vaulted for half of the runtime. And I mean, like, sand tunneling was such a cool idea, but it was also so buggy anytime you wanted to use it, and it kind of sucked, I can't lie. It is kind of a forgettable season, but there is one big talking point for this season, however, and that is the fact that it kind of opened the floodgate for how many collabs could fit into a season. Like we went from getting 3 across the entire span of one to being able to have, what, like 20 to 30 different collabs, some of which can just hijack the entire theme. Modern Fortnite wouldn't be the way it is today, you know, with at least 3 collabs every single week, if this season never happened, or if it simply never went around collabs the way it did. And whether that's for the better or for the worse is up to you to decide, and I definitely do think there is an argument to be made for both sides of the conversation around this point. But at the end of the day, this is one of those fine enough seasons, which at the time was like okay to play, like it wasn't anything special, but looking back on, it was super influential on where the game was headed, and would change the course of Fortnite forever. It was a good enough season. It didn't do anything crazy. It was just a fun, consistent experience, which I think deserves to be sat just above the middle of the list. But coming up next at the number 24 spot, we have a season that not too many people talk about much anymore, which is surprising when you consider what it actually brought to the game with Chapter 3 Season 2 Resistance. And I can't even lie, this season was actually really fun. This is definitely the part of the list where seasons start to become really good, and I have to start nitpicking to find reasons to hate on them. But I mean, you had so much stuff going on. You had like the whole war mechanic, which was super engaging. You know, you'd drop at a location and you'd have to fight like NPCs to win over a location. Even though the whole system was mad rigged, it was really fun. You also had like some pretty okay map changes, like you had the Collider being added, and maybe you could technically count Corvette Canyon, even though it was basically just a reskin of Command Cavern from Chapter 3 Season 1. It was still pretty cool, I guess. I mean, yeah, all of this is fine and all, but it wasn't the main gimmick of the season. No, that was zero build. Holy crap, that was such a huge addition in such a nothing season. It literally saved the game. I mean, the conversation around the skill ceiling that came with the whole building mechanic was at its breaking point during Chapter 3. You know, there've been like years and years and years of build-up of people making like Taj Mahal jokes or like skyscraper jokes, and it was getting to the point where like tons of like old Fortnite YouTubers were just quitting the game, and so was I actually. When I say if it wasn't for this season, I wouldn't be here sitting and recording this video right now. I'm not kidding. This change brought me back after I almost quit the game entirely. And to make things even better, it wasn't even the only one in Resistance, with of course the season also adding mantling and sprinting, which I literally can't imagine the game without at this point. I just talked about this in the last point, but yeah, this is pretty much the epitome of mediocre season with huge influence. It was super cool at the time, but at the same time, I just really didn't like the map in this season. And also the weapon meta was a little mediocre. It didn't really have a standout weapon. You know, like, take for example the Nitro Fist from Wrecked or the 7 Gauntlets from Showdown. So I can't really put it too high up on the list, just from like a gameplay viewpoint. And once you see what's coming next, you'll understand why. And coming up next is one of those reasons why, with Chapter 6 Season 4 Shock and Awesome. Now this one, hold on, I know this is controversial. This one was basically the concept of Resistance, but done in an infinitely more fun way than it was in that season. Listen guys, I'm not gonna lie, even though the map changes that this thing brought looked like ass, they were ass ugly, they were so unbelievably hard to look at. I actually really enjoyed the map changes and POIs that this season brought. I just kind of clicked with the first half of this season. Like, I was hopping on literally every single day, especially when those god-awful medallions medallions left the game. To this day, I still don't understand how medallions like that even got past the playtesting stage. But I just loved the weapon meta. There was so much stuff. I loved how there was a double pump in that season. You know, we hadn't had one since like season 3, so to get something like that again was super unique. The OXR rifle was great. The new minigun was great. I mean, you had tons of returning items as well, to the point where I could basically make an entire video just listing off how many different returning items we got throughout this season. Stuff just kept getting vaulted and unvaulted and vaulted again. There's just way too much to talk about with this season. Like, do I talk about the Megazord transformation mythic, the Daft Punk experience, the K-pop Demon Hunters collab, Delulu? This whole thing was insane. Like, to the point where if you just waited long enough, maybe you quit the game in the first few weeks, you would deadass played an entirely new season by the end of it. Like seriously, look at this. This was an overnight update. They never told us about this, and it was like a whole ass new season with 6 entire map changes. Now, it was kind of a bad thing. The season never really settled on one single identity, and it definitely made people not like it as much as they could have, and unfortunately that is why it got itself pushed up to the number 23 spot on this list. If it stuck to one single vibe, it would have for sure ended up a little bit higher, maybe like 3 or 4 spots up, but even through all that, it was still fun as hell, and I think where it's at is pretty much perfect. And carrying on from that point, we're going from a season which the community despised to one which they thought was just alright, with Chapter 7 Season 1, Golden Coast. I mean, starting off, the map was great, even if it was a little bit bland. Every POI felt unique. That was definitely a huge positive. I mean, it was fantastic. You had like a San Francisco-inspired POI on the left side of the map with Bumpy Bay, what was basically just LA down the bottom with Battlewood Boulevard, and a Nevada-themed area with Classified Canyon. This map had so much potential, which is why I think it's such a shame that it was designed so heavily around storm surfing. You can literally see everything is stuck around the edge, and you only really had lethal labs in the middle. I gotta say though, getting around the map was pretty fun. Like, the wingsuit is maybe one of the best mobility items since the Shockwave Hammer. It was super fun, it was really well balanced, I loved how you could actually track where your opponents went with a smoke trail. It wasn't an instant getaway, and that is definitely a huge positive for a movement item. And the lore in this season was great as well. You know, we had so many mini events, it was unbelievable. I mean, as a fan of the story, it was great to see this happen again to this scale. It had me hooked. Yeah, to be honest, I don't really have any ill feelings towards this season. It was pretty good, but unfortunately, same as Chapter 2 Season 1, it just lasted a little bit too long at a runtime of almost 110 days. I mean, to put that into context, Chapter 2 Season 1 only lasted 18 days longer than this one. It dragged towards the end, and that is almost entirely the reason it's this far down the list. Other than that, it was just a pretty solid season, and it was a great start to a new chapter. Carrying on from that though, heading into the epic tier section of this video, we have what is definitely the most confusing season in our rankings. Right smack dab in the middle of the list, Chapter 3, Season 3, Vibin'. This one kinda gets a bad reputation across the community for some reason, but I actually kinda liked it. I mean, it was super fun, it had a ton of soul, and frankly, some of the best POIs to ever be added to the game, with both the Rave Cave and the Reality Tree, as well as the beautiful mushroom biome that surrounded the latter. You had a pretty fun loot pool, as well as a decent amount of content spread throughout the season, and especially seeing as this one came off of the back of one of the best live events of all time, I'm genuinely trying my hardest to remember why this one was as hated as it was. But I've got nothing. On paper, this season just sounds like harmless fun. Like, so much stuff came back. So much stuff was new. I loved being able to mess around with the ballers again after almost 11 seasons of them being absent. The reality sapling system was mad fun too. I loved taking care of it and growing it from match to match, even if it did take a little bit too long. And it made for a super engaging early game where you would just drop down and get this before anybody else did. It had what was definitely one of the better maps in the game's history. The loot pool was fine, I suppose, and the battle pass was literally out of this world. This season's biggest sin was that it just didn't do anything crazy. Like, after an incredible run of seasons with both Flipped and Resistance, adding a crazy amount of content, going back to a Fortnite season that was just decent felt a little bit boring. It really is a shame that this season came out when it did, because if it had released at any other time, it would have been considered really well put together. But unfortunately, it was sandwiched between some of the best and worst seasons to ever come to the game, so unfortunately for Vibin', being good just wasn't good enough. It truly was a shame. On the other hand though, coming up next is a season that really didn't do enough, and unlike Vibin, couldn't back itself up with a good theme or feel, Chapter 7 Season 3 runners. Now, going into the season, and even on the first few weeks of this season, I was super optimistic with where it was headed. I mean, you look at my channel, you look at the review that I made for it, I was praising it top to bottom. I thought that this season had the potential to be even better than the previous season, Fortnite Showdown, but I've just been really let down. I mean, the gameplay is fine, I suppose. The map is really good, I'll give it that. Getting a brand new one in the middle of a chapter is unheard of, and I am so glad they did, because I didn't really gel with the original Chapter 7 map. But I don't know, something about this season just wasn't interesting to me. I mean, there was literally no new content across the entire season. When I say none, I mean none. I don't even mean like a tiny amount. The amount of content in this season makes Wilds look like a party. For example, like, I'm talking about the entire runtime. We got like maybe 1 or 2 new pistols that nobody's really going to use because there's already one pistol that completely dominated the loot pool. Literally all of the content for this season has just been adding sprites to the game. I mean, not even like new sprites every week. No, that'd actually be fun. Instead, they were just adding variations of existing sprites, with each variation getting rarer and rarer to find. It just sucks, man. I'm sorry, but the average person just isn't gonna know these things exist. If you aren't terminally online, you simply won't even know a 0-point sprite or a grim sprite is even in the game, and that in of itself should just show how huge of a flaw this is as the main form of content for the season. The only reason this thing isn't up in the 30s, and I'm talking like up in the 30s, I'm talking like high 30s, like 36, 37, is because the map and the loot pool are carrying the season entirely. But that's literally it. I'm not lying when I say nothing happened in this season. It felt so bad going from the previous one, potentially one of the most content-packed seasons of all time, to just nothing. It feels like we've been thrown out of a hot sauna into an ice lake, and the sudden shock of it all is being felt throughout the community right now. It is so devastating seeing this season fall as far as it did. Like I said, it had a ton of potential, but it just squandered it completely. And talking about a season with similar squandered potential, we finally have another season from Chapter 4 with its final full-length season, Last Resort. Now, unlike all of the other points on this list, we're going to start talking about the gameplay loop of this thing first, mainly because of how much the season relied on it, in which you would essentially land at one of the 3 new POIs on the map, you would break into one of these buildings, take down some of the guards that were walking around the base, head down to the basement, sneaking past tons of lasers and turrets, smash and grab a mythic of your choosing from a glass case, and escape before the lobby catches you on your way out, as an alarm would blare at full volume across the map. Honestly, this whole system was super fun. It is definitely the best vault system Fortnite has ever added. I know they've tried several times, what with Top Secret and Lawless, maybe you could even count the Most Wanted event from Chapter 4 Season 1, but this is definitely the best it's ever been done, and it was a great way to keep people engaged with the season. And talking about the gameplay itself, I mean, the movement was phenomenal, the rocket ram was stupid fun. I just loved bashing through all the buildings, because this thing would just go. And I also did quite like the cars that were in this season. I don't quite remember what they were called. Chapter 4 had a ton of random ass cars that were like essentially identical in how they played, but they all had different names. But the cars in this season were pretty cool. I will say though, the rest of the loot pool in this season stank. Like, I just never liked how the twin mag assault rifle felt. And with other amazing items like the scope burst SMG and the infiltrator pump, it's safe to say that those vaults were contested. And on top of all of that, to finish off the season, you also had what is easily the worst Fortnite mares like ever. Like, I'm sorry, but this season stunk towards the end of it. You know, with how little content there actually was. There's a reason people were so ravenous for OG after this season ended. Like, this season and Wilds, you know, being back to back, made me hate Chapter 4 for a good amount of time until Chapter 5 ended, which definitely caused me to look back on it a lot more fondly. It is a shame, really, because on that first day, it's definitely some of the most fun I've ever had with a Fortnite season. But moving on to the one that I wasn't able to play until recently, you know, with it coming back in the OG mode, we have Chapter 1 Season 5 Worlds Collide. Now, I have said this so many times on this channel already, but it isn't that good. I have seen people calling it the best season of all time, but whenever people tend to talk about this season, they always elect to forget one massive issue that this season had, being the spray meta. I'm sorry, but this issue made the game so ridiculous to play. In one single loot pool, you had the Prime P90, you had the Prime Drum Gun, you had the TAC SMG, the Minigun, the Submachine Gun, the Suppressed SMG, the LMG. Oh, whenever I talk about this, I feel like I'm going insane. Why does nobody ever bring this up? Seriously, that was such a menace over this season, and it definitely made for a blemish on a season that would be otherwise just as good as seasons 1 to 3 and especially season 4. It wasn't all bad though. I mean, the map changes were genuinely 10 out of 10s across the board. I consider Paradise Palms up there with POIs like Tilted Towers and Retail Row. It's one of the GOATs. There were also tons of other areas. You know, you had like the Softies Diner, you had the Viking Village, and the...
There's a Diplodocus!
All of these little areas were incredible, and they led to some of the most iconic clips to come out of early Fortnite. Plus, a little cherry on top for this season was the fact that it introduced the first ever story moment to the game, with, of course, Kevin the Cube. This had the world by its throat. Everyone was talking about it, and without this little mysterious thing that happened, what, 6 years ago, we simply wouldn't have mini-events like the upcoming Unstable event, and basically anything to do with the Dark Voyager. Yeah, no, I mean, this season is pretty good on paper. There's definitely a reason they started Season OG on this season. It's basically when Fortnite finally settled into what it was going to be going forward. It had phenomenal theming, genuinely goated map changes, and a somewhat decent loot pool once it settled down a little bit, but at the same time, it definitely wasn't without any flaws, and in my opinion, there's a season coming up next, which did literally everything, and I mean everything, this season wanted to do, but better. And yeah, of course, I'm talking about the one that came immediately after it, being Chapter 1, Season 6, Darkness Rises. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this one kinda just felt like Season 5 Part 2. It fixed every issue I had with it, and it kept all of the stuff that I liked. It killed off the spray meta, and the map got even better. God, dude, I love both versions of Leaky Lake, especially the second one after the Butterfly event. That one might genuinely be my favorite Fortnite point of interest of all time. It is unironically so gorgeous. And keeping on the topic of the POIs this season added, the idea of a moving POI that changes its position from match to match with the Cube Island that was basically the poster boy for this season was so cool, and I can't believe this idea hasn't been revisited past adding maybe a few floating islands as a mid-match objective. It also had a great loophole. Like I said, with the spray meta being removed, it left a gap that they filled with some of the craziest items across the game's lifespan. Like you had the post-buff double barrel shotgun, you had the quad launcher, and the high tier pump. This season felt so great to play, and I'm super glad that they went about it the way that they did. Seriously, the vibes for this season were unreal. I gotta say, I do definitely miss when they made these things themed around the literal season that would be taking place in. You know, think Season 7 for winter and Season 6 for Halloween. It gave them such a distinct identity, and it's a huge part of why I love this one as much as I do. But at the same time, there just isn't that much more to talk about. It's better, that's for sure, but there just isn't enough to call it a totally brand new season, I feel. Like, and this might be my hot take for this part of the list, if this season was done today, you know, in modern day Epic Games style, it would be made into a mini season. And I think that sums up exactly how I feel about Darkness Rises. It was good, but it felt more like an event more than a fully fledged Fortnite season. Now though, moving on to a beast of a season, or one which in no way could be called an event, we have Chapter 2 Season 7 Invasion at the number 16 spot. This was insane. Like, holy crap, there was so much going on in this season. I mean, it's basically known for its crazy loot pool and gameplay loot. You had tons of items like the Gravitron, which could fling objects and players around, the prop gun, which is insane to have in a battle royale match, the inflatable, which would literally just inflate, as the name suggests, and let you bounce halfway across the map. This is easily one of the most stupid fun loot pools I've ever experienced. And you had tons of like crazy vehicles too. Like the UFO was really fun, and the Ferrari was just plain ridiculous. I don't know how there was a literal spaceship in the game and a car was better at flying around the map. That thing was actually so much fun to mess around with, and it's pretty exemplary of how the gameplay for the season felt. But I gotta say this, man, I'm sorry, the map for this season was genuinely so bad, man. Like, come on. It was basically the exact same as Season 1, just with a big-ass hole in the middle, and maybe a few ruins dotted around from Primal. Like, what were we doing here, guys? Especially as it actually got worse with every update. A new POI would be abducted by the mothership every single week, just leaving a massive hole and the ruins of said location behind. Yeah, I gotta say, that's definitely the weakest part of the season. Despite all that, though, you know, it still was a Chapter 2 map, so, like, it was pretty good despite all that. And also, the season ended with a crazy good live event. To this day, Operation Skyfire is the only one so far to run entirely on hype moments and over and pull it off. The return of the cube sent genuine chills down my spine when I saw it back in 2021. God, I just love everything about that moment. I love the music, I love the setup, I love the whole feel of the scene, just seeing it rise back up out of the water. Even though I did think this event was a little bit too walkthrough experience-y, rather than actual spectacle like most other Fortnite events for the most part. But the ending for this thing more than made up for it. I have never been more hyped for a season than when I saw the spaceship crashing down towards the island. This season it just had it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it just understood how to be a phenomenal Fortnite experience. It's as praised as much as it is for a reason. And carrying on with this ranking, landing in right at the number 15 spot, we have one that you guys might not agree when we placed it up here, with Chapter 6 Season 2 Lawless. Now, there is a lot to be said about this season, but instead of prattling on about the graphics or lighting changes, we're just going to dive into the best part of the season, of course, being the heist mechanic. Oh my god, the gameplay loop that this season offered was so much fun. I mean, breaking into the vaults was like the best part of the season, and it actually succeeded in creating a repetitive gameplay loop I wanted to engage in over and over again. I'm looking at you, runners. Essentially, what you would do is that you'd throw some thermite at a wall, which would cause some AI to spawn that once eliminated could actually drop some pretty decent loot, essentially meaning that all you would need to do to grab a decent inventory in the early game would be to drop at one of these vaults and just fight through a couple of waves. It added a huge incentive to actually engage with these features, especially since once you got through each wave, you would actually break into the vault and pick up a special coin called a $1. Wait, what? Oh, I'm being told by my team that it was called a dilbit and that I probably shouldn't call them $. Whatever, guys. On a more serious note, though, I loved every single part about this season. You know, I loved the train vault too. That was super fun. I loved the whole dynamic of having to take it over while it was on the move. The kneecapper was super fun. It felt like a slightly, and I mean slightly, don't come after me, nerfed version of the Typhoon Blade from the season prior. It was great for movement, and it was hilarious for sending people just flying off a cliff. The exotics in the season were insane too, and in my opinion, they are the best since Chapter 4 Season 1, maybe ever. I mean, the Shockwave rocket launcher was so goated, since especially in this season, you actually could get the ammo for this thing, which is a big issue that I had with the lawful rocket launcher from Chapter 7 Season 2. The Trinity assault rifle was genuinely busted. It is easily the best AR shotgun combo of all time, and combining the Rift launcher with the Gilded Eye drum gun, which also dropped this season, it just instantly won you the match. It was that strong. Everything about Lawless was fast-paced and way over the top, but not to a point where the game was unplayable. It was exactly my kind of season. It is such a shame that so many people seem to hate on it, because I had a ton of fun with this one. But at the same time, as you guys can clearly see, I still think there are 14 seasons across the game's lifespan that are simply better than this one. So, moving on to one of those seasons, coming up next at the number 14 spot is one which I've seen a lot of glaze for in recent times, Chapter 4 Season 1, Oathbound. Alright, listen, I'm gonna say this, hands down, this is the best the game has ever looked. I mean, graphics were on top of this season. They have never been beaten since. It was genuinely stunning. And not only did this map look good, but it also played really good. I mean, you had some amazing points of interest, even if you didn't have that many, because I don't know if you guys remember, but this map only had 9 on launch. The only real stinker out of the bunch was Breakwater Bay. And even then, it was only bad because it was a named point of interest. It's definitely this could have been a landmark of this map for sure, but at the same time, it was still pretty good too. I mean, the meta for this season was amazing as well. Like, you had some really cool weapons like the Shockwave Hammer and the Excalibur Rifle, and with them going hand in hand with some super consistent weapons like the Thunder Shotgun and the Red Eye Assault Rifle, it just made for a really fun feeling loot pool, which I had a great time using when it was out. Honestly, it was just a really solid season overall, but it just had one big issue, or should I say a tiny issue, which was the fact that the map was just a little bit too small for me. I don't know, guys. I'm not the biggest fan of smaller maps. I definitely wasn't the biggest fan of the Chapter 7 Season 1 map for this exact reason, and I'm definitely going to say this. The season that came after this one perfected literally every issue I had with this map, and that's definitely a big part of the reason as to why it's going to sit above it later in this video. But heading back to Earthbound for a minute, yeah, for what it was actually really good. Especially now knowing how much of a rush job this chapter must have been, the fact that they were able to put this out in such a small amount of time leads me to say that it more than deserves to be sat where it is on this list. And while I'm on the topic of great seasons, heading into the legendary section of this tier list, we're going to be following that one up with a super underrated season, one which did something incredibly unique with its premise, but unfortunately gets overshadowed by its predecessor almost consistently, with Chapter 2 Season 3 Splashdown. I mean, if you're going to talk about this season, you've got to discuss the main gimmick of the first half for this season, obviously being the flooded map. Now, I'm going to talk about how it affected the gameplay later in this point, but this was so unironically cool. Before this, we'd never seen anything like it, and to this day, we haven't seen anything like it since. It was just so interesting, and again, it established the season immediately. It's always a huge W when they have something to define themselves by, and I know I say this basically every time I talk about this season, but modern day Epic Games wouldn't have the balls to lock off half the map for most of the season. Now, it also did some other stuff outside of this single change, namely being the fact that it replaced the pump entirely for the first time. Like, even Season 9 eventually ended up caving under the pressure and adding it back halfway through the season. No, this one committed to it, and it felt great because of it. Plus, I know I'm definitely in the minority for this, but I actually love the vibes of the water map. Just seeing all of the locations that we got to know over the prior long-ass seasons, either floating around on little bubbles or slowly getting to recover all of them one by one as the water level dropped, was so much fun, and it made for a reason to hop on every single week. You know, you could take a break from the game and come back, and then maybe Lazy Lake was back, or even a brand new point of interest with Carl. I mean Coral Castle. It led to some super interesting fights and basically forced everyone to go back to the Season 1 to 4 building technique of just making a tower and shooting from the top, because you just couldn't get mats in the middle of the ocean, and if you like sweated your ass off, you'd just end up watered in the middle of the ocean once you ran out. I mean, this season, it also brought, like, vehicles in Fortnite as we know them today, which was pretty insane. I always forget it was this season that brought them to the game, but yeah, on a random Thursday, we suddenly got the Whiplash and the Bear and the Mud Flap. But even considering all of that, this one was basically a slightly lesser version of the season we're going to talk about very shortly, and for that reason, I just can't put it up too high, but I do think that where it's sat on this ranking is perfectly fine. Again, unfortunately, it just gets outshone by the season that came before it. However, with that one out of the way, we're going to move on to what was honestly one of my favorite times to ever play the game, Chapter 1, Season 7, You'd Better Watch Out. Now, okay guys, I might be slightly biased on this one because this was the first season I ever played, but being able to replay this one just a couple of months ago in the OG mode made me remember I'm not biased with this season, it's just that good. I mean, first, talking about the season itself, you gotta keep in mind that this was the second ever major map update post Season 5. You know, it added a whole ass snow biome with tons of go-to POIs like Happy Hamlet and Polar Peak. At the time, this was crazy. It was absolutely huge. Like, yeah, sure, Season 5 added, what, maybe one point of interest and a ton of, like, smaller areas, but this new snow biome added so much more. And to make things even better for this season, you know, looking outside of map changes, it was also the season that introduced creative mode, which was beyond insane. I could literally base my entire point around this, but I'll keep it brief. Without this small addition in the middle of this season, there would be no Steal a Brain mode, and there would be no player-made BR maps like Hyperion or Chapter 3 Revive. And of course, all of this went hand in hand with the addition of the block this season, which was actually super cool, you know, allowing player-made structures to be added to actual Battle Royale. I hope they do something like it again, but at the same time, I think we all remember why it stopped. On a more positive note though, you know, this season also had a top 3 Winterfest of all time. It came with tons of great rewards, and the addition of the first ever snow map led to one of the coziest times to ever be playing the game. Seriously, if you weren't experiencing it back then, you just wouldn't understand. Now, it wasn't all good though. You know, we had potentially one of the worst live events of all time. I mean, this thing would barely even be a mini event today. The Ice Storm live event has got to be one of the biggest letdowns a Fortnite season has ever produced. Like, this event makes week 1 of Cubes look good. Even when I was ranking every live event in Fortnite history, I didn't even know if this should count as a live event for that video. That is how genuinely pathetic this thing was. It barely lasted, what, like 20 seconds? I mean, at least Remix Prelude had some good songs. I will say though, you know, bringing back the Cube Monsters was good as hell though. And overall, unlike a lot of the other seasons earlier in this video, when the season did end, it did it with grace. Once the Infinity Blade got vaulted and the planes got nerfed into the ground, it mellowed out into what I think was just a pretty good season. It's undeniable that this one is great. And talking about great, coming up next is probably one you guys were expecting to be around this point of the list, being of course, Chapter 2 Season 2 Top Secret. Now, it is a little bit annoying that I gotta put this up here. I didn't even really like it that much. But yeah, guys, even I can admit that this season is perfectly glazed by the community. It is simply just that good. I mean, the added bosses and AI guards, which are basically core parts of the Fortnite experience nowadays. I can't even think of the last time we had a season without any of these guys in. Seriously, this one tiny addition completely changed how the game will be played going forward. And to make this even crazier, it wasn't even the only one. Because of course, during this season as well, dropping from the bosses that I just mentioned, you would also see the introduction of mythics as we know them today. Like, even though we did have some, you know, before this point, with items like the Thanos Gauntlet and the Batman Grapnel Gun, these items were more gimmicky than anything else. So to see them introduced in the way they were this season was unironically groundbreaking. Literally, when I say these additions changed the game forever, I mean that the gameplay loop is still the same from this season. You know, we still drop in, we still loot up, and charge on to take on a boss for a mythic item. This season is simply that influential. And that's not even all we've got to talk about for this point. I mean, the map for this season was great too. I don't even have to mention the Agency of the Grotto. It also had a fantastic loot pool, like, what with it having, you know, just a classic, like, assault rifle, pump shotgun, submachine gun loot pool. It's gonna be consistent, just like every other Chapter 1/early Chapter 2 loot pool. All of this is to say, simply put, this season would have easily made it to the Mythic tier on this ranking if it wasn't for one major issue which has already affected the placement of 2 other seasons on this list, the fact that it went on as long as it did. I mean, people often forget this, but Top Secret was only like a couple of weeks short of lasting just as long as Chapter 2 Season 1, even though it does have a legendary status, and believe me, I know I'm gonna piss off a lot of people by not putting it up at the number 1 spot. But seriously, if you played it back in the day, it dragged in those final few moments. And for that very reason, it's ended up at the number 11 spot on this list. But starting off the next point, at the number 10 spot, we have another near unanimously praised season, but this time I fully agree with it, being Chapter 1 Season 4. Alright, now there's for sure an argument to be had that this was the best season of Chapter 1. And even though I have my doubts about that, I do think there is one more season left in that chapter that I will put above it. It's for sure the best season of early Chapter 1 at least. I mean, this season, it felt well established, you know, it finally felt like the game had figured out what it was gonna be, and even though, like I said, it wouldn't really properly settle until Season 5, this season was the first out of the original 4 that could literally be re-released today and still receive critical acclaim. I mean, there's just so much that it did. I mean, this season, it changed movement forever, you know, with the addition of Hop Rocks, which would eventually end up leading into items like Shockwave Grenades, and eventually even weapons like the Hop Rock Dualies and the 0-point shards. I mean, on top of all that, you know, this season also kickstarted the lore properly into action, and in the same season, it also had the first ever live event, which changed not just Fortnite in of itself, but the games industry as a whole. Nothing like it had ever been done before, and I don't think it ever will again. Seriously, this season was so hugely important for the game. So many people were playing, you can definitely make an argument saying that Fortnite's cultural popularity peaked here. It is one of the best seasons in Fortnite history for a reason, but at the same time, it is also still a fairly early season in the grand scheme of things. So I can't really, in good conscience, put it above other seasons which do way more with the same level of quality. And on the topic of consistency, coming up next is another one that I might be a little biased towards, you know, with it being my first full season of Fortnite, Chapter 1 Season 8 Xbox The Spot. Now, in my opinion, this is easily the best season of Chapter 1. Definitely the best late Chapter 1 season if you think Season 4 should be up here instead. And I can't lie, I definitely do think that those 2 points are interchangeable, but there's no denying that the map peaked here. I mean, come on guys, you had the fully intact ice biome pre-Devourer. You had the pre-dig site loot lake, and the entire jungle biome with the volcano. It's simply insane that all of this existed all at the same time. I mean, Season 8 had some great movement too. You know, it didn't feel sluggish in the slightest, which was definitely a big issue that I had with Season 4. I mean, the cannons, which was the new vehicle for this season, was super fun. I love just shooting myself around the map with these things, just cannonballing everywhere. And the flint-knot pistol, even though it was a weapon, was also just as fun. I combined all of this with the ATKs and the hoverboard still being in the loot pool from last season. This was easily the best feeling Chapter 1 season movement-wise for sure. And the weapon meta was at a peak too. You didn't have any overpowered weapons like the Infinity Blade. It was just a pure and simple AR, shotgun, SMG. I've already said it, you know what I mean. It was simple and it was great. Honestly, it just felt like the last real season without a gimmick. Everything past this one has just felt like it's had to sort of prove itself with some over-the-top feature. I mean, you look at Season 9, you know, it had all the crazy future stuff, it had all the wind tunnels. I mean, you look at Season X was Season X. I don't know, weapon metas just haven't felt as good since this one. I just hold a soft spot in my heart for this season. It was my first full one, I enjoyed playing it every single day, and I think it more than deserves to be sat inside of the top 10. It was just amazing, but not as amazing as the season at the number 8 spot in this list, Mega. I mean, what do you even talk about when you're talking about this season? It had some great map changes. You know, it's like the best thing about this season. Listen, even though Mega City is low-key just like a worse seaport city from Chapter 6, it was insane for its time, and it both looked stunning and was great to move around with the grind rails ensuring that the POI wasn't too big for fighting. It did also have a few more forgettable locations added as well. I mean, who in their right minds was actually landing at Naughty Nets? But even then they weren't too bad. The mega biome itself was gorgeous too. The landscape was really fun to fight around, and the blue grass, I gotta say, was super pretty. It's a shame that we seem to be stuck with pale green since Chapter 5, because this was genuinely gorgeous. Overall, there were some great changes to the Chapter 4 Season 1 map, and as I said when I was talking about that season, it just helped fill out that empty space that caused said island to feel super empty. You also had an insane loot pool, you know, you had the Havoc shotgun and assault rifle. Both of those were really good, and the kinetic blade was also a major W for movement. And just as a little cherry on the top for the loot pool in this season, you also had some of the best mythics of all time with the ODM gear and the overclock pulse rifle in the same loot pool at the same time. What can be said about those two that hasn't already? This season did have one major controversial change, however, and that was the fact that it changed the pacing of the game completely, with it adjusting the storm circles from having 9 zones to 12, purely to make room for the mid-match objectives that would be added in this season, such as the floating island and the drop cache. Honestly, these changes were really good in this season, but it screwed over literally every other season past it. I'm sorry, but the 12 storm system without the mid-match objectives is simply a failure, and it led to those massive third zones with less than 12 people in it during Chapter 6 and kind of into Chapter 7. Although, to be fair, it's not strictly this season's fault, but it is worth mentioning. I just really enjoyed this one outside of all that though. I loved it, man. I loved it. It was such a fun season. And talking about seasons that I loved, coming up next is potentially one of my favorites from Chapter 2, being its 4th season, Nexus War, also known as the Marvel one. Honestly, this should be the blueprint for collab seasons going forward. It pulled off the mix perfectly. It felt like the Avengers came to Fortnite rather than Fortnite just adding the Avengers, if you know what I mean. I mean, the gameplay for it as well. You know, the gameplay was insane. I loved the boss system revamp, what with them dropping superpower items instead of just like buffed versions of weapons we've already seen a million times. Honestly, how they went about this system was so much fun at the time too. Oh, they couldn't do it like they did nowadays. I can't even lie to you guys, it would suck. But at the time, it was perfect for how the gameplay felt. Also, Nexus War easily has a contender for the best mid-season update ever. Stark Industries was such a genuinely phenomenal POI, and I can't believe that we only got to play it for half of the season. It's got to be one of the best biomes of all time. It was so gorgeous. I know I've been saying that a lot, but this was truly gorgeous. Just like a mix of all the beautiful colors and the Chapter 2 graphics. Everything about it was just absolutely fantastic. Honestly, this place should have stayed for 0 Point. I don't even care about Frenzy Farm. This place should have been it. Also, I gotta say this as well, the Galactus event was so much fun too. I'm pretty sure it was the first properly interactive event. You know, up until then, it had just kind of been like things happening around you. Occasionally, you get involved with it, but it's no more than a 2-second cutscene. But this event marked a change in how events would approach it going forward, and I loved how they pulled it off. The battle bus was the best part of the event. I loved just flying around with that thing. But at the same time, the spectacle element, which I loved, still managed to remain as everything kind of happened around you at the same time. This season was super fun, it was really well polished, it ended with a banger live event. What more can you want? It just blew me away. But it isn't the only season of Fortnite that surprised me with how fun a full-scale collaboration season could be, because following that one up, we finally have our next mini-season to discuss, The Simpsons? I don't know, it never really got a full tagline. Now, going into this season, I did not have faith in this at all. I'm British. This show simply isn't as big here as it is over in the States. I grew up for a pretty substantial amount of time without even seeing an episode of the show. So, safe to say, I had no real emotional attachment to this particular brand. But logging onto the season after the downtime ended, I was blown away. The gameplay was so much fun. Like, from the revamped Striker Assault Rifle to the Nitro Slap Juice Hybrid found with a squishy item, and especially the exotic Mr. Blaster Revolver, the gameplay this season ended up being super fast-paced, super chaotic, and I just fell in love. Even though I did enjoy the previous season, shock and awesome, I never realized just how far said season had gone with its meta and chaotic playstyle. The Simpsons mini-season reined it all the way back in and simplified the gameplay loop way down, leaving only a pure and entertaining system in its wake. I mean, even the map was amazing. Even I could tell that it was just jam-packed of beautiful homages. Everything from the small details inside of the houses to the cel-shaded look of the island was amazing. It had so much soul, and it genuinely took me off guard, especially with what we knew about said map going into it. I was not expecting all that. I could seriously talk about this one for so much longer. Maybe I will. Everything from the map, which was full of soul and care, to the return of the weather elements from Chapter 3 with the Donut Storms, and especially the weekly fully voiced and animated in-universe clips. It was just fantastic, and I can't believe we got all that for a mini-season. Not only did it exceed my expectations for a Simpsons collab season, but it ended up raising the bar for what a Fortnite season could be. It was actual, genuine fun from start to finish, and I am so glad that it seems, as a recording, to have found a permanent home as a map in Reload. And kicking off my top 5, we finally entered into the Mythic tier, starting off with what was honestly one of my favourite seasons in recent times, up until very recently, with Chapter 6 Season 1, Demon Hunters. Now, I know that I'm going to get flamed for putting this here. I certainly did the last time I talked about this season on my channel, but this one was unironically goated. It felt like such a breath of fresh air after the insane drought of art style and interesting combat we saw throughout Chapter 5. To get an island this gorgeous and see the weapon meta return back to its hit scan roots was amazing to see at the time, and I still remember just how much fun I had playing this season. I mean, guys, you know it's good. If the worst parts of it was a movement item that was barely as strong as some of Chapter 5's most broken item, it just goes to show how well put together this season felt. And on top of that, I'm going to keep gushing about the map because I just love it so much. The theming was consistent as hell. The Japanese essence just tied the whole atmosphere of the island together, with literally not a single point of interest feeling out of place. Seaport City might be a top 5 residential location of all time. It's everything that Mega City wanted to be. Night Shift Forest was super cool too. You know, I love the whole time-changing gimmick you would see when you landed in that location. And being able to free the curse was such a cool concept. And it's such a shame that this beautiful location didn't stick around past this season. I could go on and on about all of these locations. Like, this map made a bridge feel like a solid place to land at. It wasn't even intact for most of the season. That's just how goated this map was. And talking about the atmosphere, if you're going to be talking about Demon Hunters, you have got to mention the phenomenal Winterfest that occurred that year. It just hit those cozy vibes perfectly. And this is going to be a bit of a strange one, but it made me feel exactly the same way that I felt playing back during December of 2019 and 2021. It was just a beautiful season all around, both in terms of map design and gameplay and everything else. It's easily one of my personal favorites to ever come out, and I think it more than deserves to kick off the top 5 on this list. But following that one up, coming up next at the number 4 spot, we have a somewhat recent addition to the list, all things considered, being Fortnite Showdown. Alright, now guys, this one might be recency bias, but in my opinion, we had a truly phenomenal season on our hands here. Like, the pure amount of content that we got every single day was insane. Brand new weapons releasing what felt like every single day, and the lore and the map changes and everything else throughout was just as great. This season had a little bit of something for everyone. Like, for the first point that I talked about, with how the axe system was set up, what with everyone having to work together to achieve a goal as one big team, it meant that we were never without content for too long, and it constantly encouraged ironic discourse throughout the season, with Team Ice King constantly taunting Team 7 for basically losing every single milestone.
Out of pocket for that shit.
Alright, but on a more serious note, this season had so much content. Like, however much I'm stressing this, it's half of what you think it could be. It was genuine insanity. And of course, I did briefly mention it a little bit earlier, but the lore was on top this season. But maybe the best it's been since early Chapter 3. Seriously, everything from the small stuff with Foundation shown to be grieving for his lost teammates in the quest text, to the huge stuff with the Shattered live event and cinematics dotted throughout the season, it just felt so rich with storytelling, and it reminded me why I was so hooked on what this game had to show throughout Chapter 1 and 2. Seriously, I could gush about this one for hours, and almost did actually, if you want to check out my full retrospective on this season after this video, but we do gotta move on from this one at some point. So, coming up next, at the number 3 spot, we have one which I've found to be really controversial all of a sudden. It's like this season went from having near unanimous praise to being slandered by half the community, and of course, I'm talking about Chapter 5, Season 5 Remix. Now, going into the season, there was a big controversy about it being a collab season. I mean, the whole community, me included, wanted something closer to how OG was presented the year prior. You know, being a celebration of the chapter it was based on rather than forcing something into it that was never there in the first place. But again, similar to the Simpsons season, I was shocked with how well it was pulled off. It felt super organic. Like, instead of the collaborations being forced and out of place, somehow it just ended up feeling like a lost season that would have taken place in between Chapter 2 Season 2 and 3. It hit those vibes perfectly, and honestly felt way better than an actual Chapter 2 rewind would have been. I mean, obviously, I still want to see that, but at the same time, I think of Week 3 being 0 Point combined with Primal, and I just shudder. The praise I have for this season cannot be put into words. Everything from the Double G bombs to Eminem's Rap God minigun, which might genuinely be my favorite mythic of all time, it just captured that insane fun feeling from that era. And this might be another hot take, but this did a much better job of paying homage to Chapter 2 than a simple rerun ever would have. It did more than take us on a nostalgia trip across the seasons we already saw. It recaptured that spirit that I never thought we would see again, and honestly, that means more to me than any memory I may have from that era. But hey, coming up next at the number 2 spot, we have one of my favorite seasons in Fortnite history, and certainly one of the most popular to ever be released, Chapter 4 Season OG. I mean, I don't even need to talk about the map itself. I mean, you guys know what it is. It is the Chapter 1 map. It kind of speaks for itself. I mean, this season was a once-in-a-lifetime event. You had to be there. I still remember where I was on that first day. Literally everyone hopped back on. It felt so good to see my friend count back over 20 after everyone left during slogs like Paradise and Wilds. Everyone was talking about the game again. Everyone was playing. Every big YouTuber was back to making videos on it, and I think that's why people remember it so fondly. I mean, not only were we back on Chapter 1, it felt like Chapter 1 again too. You know, you'd see like goofy clips every single day. You'd see people making friends in the middle of a match, and tons of hilarious fails. OG consistently had literal millions of players every single day, both on builds and 0 builds. Not even combined millions. I'm talking about 2.6 million players every single day, like 20-minute queues every time you logged in. I can't even stress how huge this actually was to somebody who wasn't there. I mean, the whole season was an event in of itself, and even though it did kind of fall apart later, with Season 7 to Season X being quite bad actually, it just didn't matter because people were still having fun. This one's gotta be up here in the Fortnite Hall of Fame. Like, if I was talking about Chapter 2 Season 1 and its bush drop being like a top 5 Fortnite moment of all time, this has to be the top Fortnite moment. Even though there were a million different issues with this season, a crap ton of scrap content which really should have stayed in, and an obvious rush job on the second half of the season, I can't in my heart ever let it leave my top 5. It was simply that good, and anyone who was there will tell you how much fun it was. But, as you guys may have noticed, even with all of this insane glazing, it isn't at the number 1 spot on this list. So, what is? And sitting all the way at the top of the list, all the way at the number 1 spot, it's the one, the only, Chapter 3 Season 1, Flipped. Alright guys, before we even get to the season itself, we gotta start at the intro. Yeah, that's right guys, this season had an intro. This has gotta be the best introduction to a chapter we've ever had. Like seriously guys, I had genuine chills down my spine when it zoomed out, bro. We're never getting this level of hype around a chapter launch again. Especially off of the back of the best live event of all time, it just led to a 10 out of 10 introduction to the brand new island. And talking about the map, let me just list some of these off. You had Sanctuary, you had Sleepy Sound, Cody Crossroads, Daily Bugle, Camp Cuddle. God, I want to go back here at some point. I am praying that we get Chapter 3 OG later this year. Even the eventual reveal of Tilted Towers throughout this season was super cool, and when this thing finally unthawed, I genuinely don't think I've seen more people drop at a point of interest since in my Fortnite career. Like, guys, I know it's been tired out at this point with like Season OG and Reload and then the OG mode again, but at the time, this was the first time this location came back since Season 8, and it was great. You also had a super iconic weapon loophole with this season. I mean, the addition of the first ever first-person weapon in Fortnite history was insane. It changed the game forever, and to make things even better, this weapon was broken as hell, especially when you combine it with a tent, which was a super cool feature, you know, being able to bring items from match to match. I seriously wish they would try something like this again. It was so cool to have that sort of high-risk, high-reward feature in the game. Like, you could bring a Mythic Wii into another match and literally get it off spawn, but at the same time, it was also super balanced because you had to think, was it worth the risk? And of course, talking about Mythics, you also had the web shooters, which were seriously one of the best movement items we've ever had in the game's lifespan. They recently came back in Chapter 7 Season 3, and they are just as good as I remember. I genuinely had so much fun swinging around in Battle Lab with these things. They were one of a kind. You are never going to see something like this ever again. And even though the weapons weren't the best all the time, you know, we did kind of have a second spray meta for about half the season, it didn't matter because the gameplay was just that fun. And talking about the gameplay, it too had a total revamp, because of course you had the introduction of the first tactical movement ability with sliding, and yeah, while sprinting and mantling wouldn't come until the next season, this was a pretty huge step, and it was revolutionary at the time. Like, the only thing we'd had to move around was jogging at that point. It was a massive shake-up to how the game was played. And to top everything else off, this season also introduced auto running, which seems slightly less impressive, but it is such a fantastic quality of life feature. Imagine all the times you've used it without even thinking, and then imagine never being able to use it again. This season was genuinely a turning point for the game, and it for sure marked a new era in Fortnite history. The game was never the same again after this point, and for that very reason, I truly believe it more than deserves to be sat at the very top of the list at the #1 spot. Alright everyone, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this long video. And also, thank you all so much again for helping me finally reach 1,000 subscribers. It truly means the world to me. And hey, if you aren't subscribed, make sure to click that button with the notification bell on. It helps me a ton and it would be greatly appreciated. Also, if things have gone through, I should, at this moment of speaking, have an Epic Games creator code by now. So if you're thinking of picking something up in the shop tonight, make sure to slap code JazzVader into the item shop, no spaces, it's completely free, and all it does is help me out a little bit whenever you make a purchase. But hey, I guess that's all I have left to say. Thank you all once again for being so patient. This video was an absolute joy to produce, and if you did watch it all the way until the end, leave a comment down below and rant about your favorite flavor of milk. It'd really confuse the guys who didn't. Alright. Getting back on track. At the end of the day, all you really gotta do is stay safe, drink some water, and have a fantastic day. Bye-bye!